So does it ever look like your child through stimming is worried they're going to be harmed? Does it ever look like they're in a full fight or flight? Get me out of here. Let me touch this. Let me do this to be safe. Does it seem like they don't feel safe and they use stimming to find safety? If that's what it feels like emotionally, mom and dad, that's what's happening neurologically within the brain. Welcome to the Experience Miracles podcast, where we help parents find hope, answers, and drug-free help to overcome your child's chronic health challenges. I'm your host, Dr. Tony Ebel, and I'll be sharing my experiences as both a dad and a doctor on every episode. I can take the latest science and neurology of healing and break it down in the most simple and relatable way possible. We'll take on the toughest topics and answer your biggest questions through interviews with other amazing parents and leading experts, leaving you with practical action steps that you can take to help your child heal and thrive. It's time to expect and experience miracles. Let's get started. All right, parents, if your child struggles with stimming, sensory overload, and just honestly, as I'll explain here as we get going neurologically, they're just constantly uncomfortable, seemingly in their own skin and just in their own body. And they constantly have to go through these stims, these movements, these mannerisms, this hand flapping, this touching, this teeth grinding, this toe walking. There's a list that we'll go through here when we get into the thick of the episode. But on this one, we're going to talk about stimming, and we're going to talk about specifically autism stimming as well. But I want to say right out of the gates, and I'll say it again later on, this is not a conversation only for kids also diagnosed with autism. Now, stimming is one of the hallmark features or kind of most commonly diagnosable features of autism, but stimming comes in a lot of forms and fashions, and stimming is less of a conversation in the world of sensory processing, ADHD, anxiety, PANS, PANDAS, and just overstressed kids and us all together. I'll just say this right out of the gates. You ever been so tense that you cracked your own neck? You ever been so wound up physically, neurologically, emotionally that you crack your own back, or you stretch things out, or you just gotta get up from your desk and move because you're just so overwhelmed, right? Now, again, the cracking of said own neck, you're like, I can't tell him that. He's a chiropractor. Don't they not like that? Well, it's not that we don't like that. It's that we don't like knowing that people, and especially if it's a kid, we don't like knowing that people's nervous system, kids' nervous systems are so overwhelmed, so full of neurophysical, I'll call it today, tension, that they feel the need to do that. See, the story behind stimming in kids, or even the things that we do as stressed out adults, the story is neuroscience. The answer, the cause, the explanation, as we always do on this podcast, we're going to give you hope. We're going to give you answers, real life, modern neuroscience explanations as to why your child is struggling with these different things, what's really causing it, because it's through those answers that you get to the drug-free solutions and action steps. So stimming is a big deal. These repetitive movements, the rocking, the spinning, the hand flapping, it can look so mysterious. Why is my kiddo doing that? Why do they need to do that? Now, anyone whose kiddo is struggling with stimming, they know that it is most commonly, and it becomes worse when they're in overwhelming situations and environments. So when they're in a noisy room, when they're in a room with lots of bright lights and stimulation coming into their nervous system, they need to calm their brain and nervous system. They need to calm and regulate their brain, their nervous system, and their body by moving. Now, why is this such a real tough day-to-day quality of life disrupting challenge for kids and families? Because it looks anything but calm to the outside, right? When your kiddo can't sit still, can't stop rocking, can't stop talking, can't stop grinding their teeth, can't stop, climbing on everything and touching everything, that's when parents become overstressed and dysregulated with their nervous system, because other parents, and again, so listen to this one, please, even if your child does not have stimming, because I think it's very important that the whole world understands what's really going on beneath the hood, if you will, for kids struggling with stimming, because they can't control it. They don't want to do it. This is not a conscious decision to grind your teeth, to bite your fingernails, to chew on your shirt, to grab a pen and chew it. And I actually, as I do with a lot of these neurosensory conversations on the podcast, I can relate to this one in a major way, because my first 20 years of life before I got adjusted and got my nervous system calmed and regulated, I was a sensory overloaded ADHD, and I had my own stims. For me, I couldn't wear certain clothes. They drove me crazy, right? And then when in class, when in these different things, I had to grit my teeth. I had to chew. I remember constantly we had the Bic, mechanical pencils, right? And they have the little tab thing or whatever it is. And I would constantly bite that off, break that off, and chew on that. I'm sure the nice toxins were really great for my already overstimulated nervous system. Your child probably has a multitude of stims. And I just want to say it again right out of the gates. You might too. Most of us do, okay? We have ways of dissipating this stuck stress noise, as you'll hear me talk about it later on with the neurological condition, a term called nociception, which is actually what's causing the stimming. So I just want you to know upon the introduction here, this is a real life challenge for lots of kids and lots of families. And there's real, honestly, not too complex neuroscience behind what's causing it. And there is real solutions. There's real strategies, drug-free, movement-based sciences to get into the nervous system, to get into this, what again, I'm going to kind of frequently, by choice, call today the neurophysical, neurosensory, neurobiomechanical tension that is trapped in your child's body that leads to the compensatory. Because what stimming is, it's compensation for stress. It's actually an adaptation. So it looks abnormal on the outside, but it's the body doing what it needs to do on the inside to try and find some calm, to try and find some regulation, to try and find some comfort. And that's, again, why it's such a dichotomy of stress for families, because the child needs to do it to even have a chance to stay in that environment, to even have a chance to regulate their environment in those certain situations especially. But it's obviously something that can be quite disruptive to others in the environment. So stimming is a very important conversation, and I am glad we are diving into it here on the Experience Miracles podcast. So define it, right? What is it? What really is stimming? Especially for those that are maybe not so familiar with it. Listening to this podcast, again, please, even if it's not your family's challenge, listen to this one because it'll really help you explain why children with autism especially struggle with this and many others too. It's these unusual noises, movements. It can kind of take a lot of different forms that helps children struggling with the problems we're going to go through here in a second really get their emotions and their sensory system in check. So it's a sign on the inside that their nervous system is overwhelmed and dysregulated. So they need to move, they need to touch, they need to stim on the outside to calm the noise on the inside. Let me just read through a list of things that can qualify as autism stimming and just stimming in general. Hand flapping, finger flicking, continually squeezing their fists, or having to pick something up and throw it all around. Unusual body movements like rocking back and forth, leaning into a table. Honestly, a lot of kiddos who have what are called upper cervical brainstem subluxations from birth trauma, like forceps, vacuum, emergency C-section, cord wrap, something I'm going to go very deep into again today, as I do on almost every episode. When you have this upper cervical subluxation and tension, many kids will literally even hit their head when overwhelmed. They'll slam their head against, if they're little and they're still in the crib, they'll hit their head against the crib or the floor or the wall. But older kiddos do this too. They're trying to literally adjust themselves. I'm kind of cart before the horse here on this section to get that tension out of there. So they'll just rotate and arch and get stuck in these various postures and mannerisms. Often it takes a very rotary, asymmetrical form. And I know here I'm on the podcast, so I can't quite give you the visuals, but we are trained as neurologically focused pediatric neurodevelopmental specialists. We can see stimming even when it's not so obvious, because the body does it for a lot of kiddos who are really struggling. A lot of their stims are very obvious, and other kiddos, they're not so obvious. So not only do conventional, pediatricians and others miss it, but other professionals, even in this world, OT, PT, can sometimes miss these signs of asymmetry and distortion. And it's really trapped into the neck and the shoulders and the body and the posture. Sometimes it's a visual stimulation. Their eyes are kind of seemingly going in a lot of different directions because the visual accommodation and what's called oculomotor function, so that sensory function, is very, very important to the brain. And so you can have these balance and visual challenges as well. Sometimes they got to keep closing the door. They got to open the door. They got to close it, open it, turn the lights on and off, go back and forth to a loved one, to someone else throughout the room. It's kind of these sort of stims as well. Chewing, biting, teeth grinding. And then one big one is maybe they're not doing this stimulation themselves, but they're seeking out the same show over and over again. They're seeking out the same song over and over again, or they need the same book over and over again, because for whatever neurological mechanism that's going on that has that dysregulation and sensory malfunction inside their nervous system, that certain stimulation, that certain song, that certain show just matches what they need to stay calm. And here's the deal with stimming that makes it extra stressful. Nerves that fire together, wired together. You've probably heard that's the neurological concept behind what's called muscle memory. So you've maybe heard, the more times you shoot a free throw, you get better at it. Yeah. The more times you practice anything physical, your brain and neuromuscular coordination and stimulation and repetition of that activity really kind of blazes that path into the brain and the nervous system, right? And someone becomes better at that mechanism. Playing an instrument, shooting, sports are the best examples of this. Unfortunately, stimming becomes this. A kiddo gets trapped into this vicious cycle and perfect storm of stimming, and then they need more of it to get the same, what's kind of called dose response effect into the brain. That's why it is so hard to break through, even with chiropractic, occupational therapy, physical therapy, sensory therapy, deep squeezes, essential oils. So I bet a lot of you feel like you've just thrown the book at your child's nervous system in all these different ways, maybe even including chiropractic care, to try and calm their sensory stemming system, and you have a hard time. What I want you to know right in the early stages of this podcast is it is very hard. Neurologically, these pathways really kind of get, I always use the analogy with patients. I'm getting old, so maybe this won't fit for a younger, but a CD that skips. Back in the day, yes, I had my 1979 Mercury Capri hatchback 2-door sweet car bought with my own money that I had from a hay baling business. If you've never listened to the podcast before, I'm a farmer. And then I put on a 6-disc CD changer, Pioneer CD deck. And that, to a lot of you, parents of my age and maybe older as well, that sounded very familiar to you, and you resonate with the awesomeness that if you were a high schooler with a 6-disc CD changer, you were living large. And others of you are like, what's a CD? And why would I put it in my car? I don't think there's a place for it. And no, there's not anymore, because we have MP3s. But in the olden days here, folks, if you got a scratch, I suppose a record would do the same thing. I think they made a comeback, the old vinyls. But if you get a scratch in it, every time it goes around and the sensory auditory receptor of that player, again, I'm not an audio engineer or electrical engineer, so I'm going to butcher this one. But if it reads the same scratch, which we're going to metaphorically connect to a subluxation, or what's called dyskinesis and dysregulation here in a second, every time it gets into that spot, it will skip. It will have a stim. It will have not smooth fluid motion. And so that's what will happen in stimming. So those are some explanations of, or some descriptions of stimming, and there can take other forms besides that list too. And again, I said it in the introduction because I didn't want this to be a conversation just for families whose child has an autism diagnosis. It's really important for families whose kids have sensory, ADHD, anxiety, seizures. And honestly, parents, even for ourselves, when we're stressed out, we stim. Now, maybe it's not toe walking and teeth grinding, but maybe it is teeth grinding. Maybe it is restless legs. Anybody have your legs and you're constantly moving before you can fall asleep? Anybody have to wear a mouth guard so you don't grind your teeth down to the gums? Yeah, that's a lot of us, okay? So this stimming conversation, I was stoked to put this one on the podcast, because for autism families and kids who are really, really stuck in the toe walking, the teeth grinding, the hand flapping, the repetitive behaviors, it's an important conversation. But I just don't think we should leave the rest of us stressed out individuals into this as well. And if I'm kind of putting some things on your radar with this, well, then what we're about to go through, which is the neuroscience behind it, and then the solutions after and the drug-free action steps after to calm the nervous system and address it at its root cause. Well, that's not just for kids with autism. That's for all of us who might have an overstressed, stuck on sympathetic fight or flight nervous system. And that's what's causing it. So again, it's an adaptive, honestly, internal adaptive compensatory pattern to an overstressed, imbalanced, dysregulated nervous system where that sympathetic fight or flight system is stuck on overload. That's why we know kiddos with autism pretty much every single child with autism equally fits the diagnosis of sensory processing disorder. They have sensory challenges in spades, unfortunately, in a negative direction. And it's the sensory issues that cause the stimming. So what's causing the sensory issues? So I know we're on a podcast, so I can't necessarily, like on a whiteboard go, okay, A to B to C to D. But let's go through this. If we know that children, let's just keep autism in it. If autism in my little equation here is C, a child has autism, and then D, one of the behaviors, one of the challenges that we want to help them with and improve their quality of life is stimming, having less of it. Well, B would be this sensory dysfunction or malfunction, sensory processing. Specifically, we're going to talk about sensory motor, because the motor system is the muscles and the movement, right? Big ones, gross motor, little ones, fine motor. So B is a sensory motor dysfunction, but we're still not to A. If there's a sensory motor, if you said, okay, your kiddos, if somebody said your child's stimming challenges are because of sensory issues or gut dysbiosis and bloating and the tension in there as well, or inflammation in the brain, and that's why they're hitting their head, they're barking up the right tree, but have they still gotten to A? They can't until you say, okay, what's causing this sensory challenge? What's causing this gut disruption? What's causing this brain inflammation? And I could go on down the list. When so many practitioners these days talk about root cause, they are so close. And having a B conversation is better than just symptoms, D, E, and on to Z, that medicine does, conventional medicine. But we have to get to A. We have to be able to say, what is going on inside the brain and the body that is causing the sensory motor disruption? And I'm going to introduce a bunch of other terms that mean the same thing, that then kick out autism, stimming, and all the other challenges that go with it. And that is where the word subluxation, which is a neurologically focused chiropractic term that has a lot of synonymous and regular or kind of similar terms that mean the same thing neurologically. Subluxation, though, physically. So I don't usually do this in a lot of the other conversations with subluxation, because if we split the hairs on subluxation, the most important part in a negative, detrimental, therefore to get positive, we need to address this part, is the third part, which is the neurological dysfunction, disruption, everything we talk about all the time. But what I want to do with this one is actually slow down a little bit here and break apart subluxation into its neurophysical, neuromuscular, neurobiomechanical components. Subluxation, and if we intentionally limit it here, it's a physical neuromuscular challenge. The first thing that happens within the body is there's a misalignment. So a set of joints, whether that is the skull and all the different cranial bones, whether that's the sphenoid, the jaw, the palate, the airway, can get involved in subluxation. In fact, I'm about to interview Dr. Bahar Esmaili, and an incredible airway specialist. And we're going to get into tons of content about that, because chiropractic and what we do very much helps with that, because these alignments or misalignments are involved. The most detrimental, the most common physical misalignment is within the spine and what we call the neurospinal system. And we call it the neurospinal system because when you study this stuff anatomically, which is how most of us learned it, we learned it in bits and pieces. There's a skeletal section to the anatomy book. There's a nervous system section to the anatomy book. There's a circulatory section, a digestive section, a motor and muscle section. So even us that go through chiropractic school, medical school, and everything else, unfortunately, we learn about how the body works in silos. We learn about it separate instead of together. Medicine has done this. We are the most siloed, specialized form of healthcare ever, where this doctor only focuses on this and this provider only focuses on this. Not us. As nervous system focused chiropractors, we work on the one singular. So if we limit it to one, if you want to work on one system that connects, controls, and modulates all of the other systems, it's the nervous system. Once you start to have a conversation about the nervous system being the most important system to get back online and get healthy, especially in neurological conditions like autism and stimming, well, then you have to look at the body and say, really simply, where is the nervous system housed? Where is it located? Well, it's everywhere, because there's nerves, sensory nerves, motor nerves. Like, the nervous system is the most vast. You think the circulatory system is vast and expansive. check out the nervous system, okay? All the way back in the day, it's gone on tour. Maybe you went to this. I think it was called Bodyworks. I remember I was in chiropractic school when this whole display came to a museum in Chicago, and they had all these different nervous system models. You could actually see the whole nervous system mapped out in these incredible displays. Maybe some of you have seen that book or seen those images. It's God's design. It's incredible. And so I know I'm going slow here, but for a reason, because stimming is a neurological issue, and stimming is a subluxation issue. So subluxation begins, if we separate it slowly here, as a physical misalignment. And when these joints within the skull, the jaw, and especially the neck, the thoracics, and the neurospinal system, that's where this sensory story really, and stimming story really needs to stay. Because I know you're looking at it like, oh, but it's my kid's hands, it's my kid's feet, it's my kid's jaw. Well, you're going to see that they're using their hands, they're using their feet, and they're using their jaw and their touch and then auditory incoming stimulation to compensate for what is not happening effectively and fully from a stimulatory good side within their spine and their nervous system. Hang with me. I'm going slow here. I know if you listen to this, you're like, he's talking a little slower on this one, because some of the innards of this one is really important to pull apart slowly and in detail. So subluxation has three components. The first one is that misalignment. The moment you have a misalignment within any of these joints of the skull, the airway, the neck, and the neurospinal system, you have fixation. So when you have subluxation, you have misalignment and you immediately have fixation. I'm talking about these three components separately during my time here, but once they are there, all three are there. You can't have one of these parts without the others. So in sequence, you end up with a misalignment first, which leads to fixation second, which leads to sensory alteration, disruption, tension third. So now we're at the neurological component of subluxation. So a physical problem, because the brain and the body are connected to each other, and the brain. One researcher, Roger Sperry, won the Nobel Prize for talking about, and he wrote it in kind of different ways. So this is just kind of the aggregate of the information. He basically proved that the brain spends 90% of its energy, its focus. And I always have to say this with patients, not like woo-woo, weirdo, hippie energy, like actual neuromuscular ATP, mitochondrial energy. The brain is a powerhouse. It's the number one energy. It takes more nutrients, it takes more oxygen, and it takes more what's called proprioception, perception of movement from the body, okay? And it spends 90% of its focus on the muscular system, the motor system, and dealing with gravity. 60% of that influence comes from the spine, comes from the neurospinal system, and 1/3 of it comes just from these tiny little joints, bones, and muscles of the neck. So digging in deeper here, we got to talk about something called proprioception, nociception, and dyskinesis. Now hang with me, it's me. So I'm going to continue to teach you this stuff in a very parent speak, farmer speak way. Proprioception is the sensory perception of movement. What are we talking about with stimming? Abnormal movements, too much movements, repetitive movements, uncontrolled movements, compensatory, uncoordinated movements. Proprioception is the good side. So proprioception is calming. In the intro, I talked about, hey, think of it this way. You got a stressed out day. Let's say you're a commuter. You get on, you're here in I'm out in the burbs. There's a commuter train down to the city. You get up, you get yourself ready to go. You drive your car sitting to the parking lot at the metro station. You get on the train. You sit on there for an hour. It gets busy. There's stuff going on. You're already getting ready for work. You're just sitting, and you go to your desk and you sit there all day. Then you get back on the train and you sit there for an hour. Then you get back in your car and you sit there for an hour. So you've sat, you haven't moved 8 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever it is. Imagine a long flight. Imagine anytime any of us that have been stuck sitting for a long period of time. The longer you sit, do you get calmer, happier, better focused, more energized, more willing to socialize and regulate your emotions and behavior? Or do you want to get up and move so you don't go crazy? So sitting is sedentary, right? So sitting, there's no stimulation of proprioception. When you do take that scenario, and let's say before you go home, you go to the gym, or you get home, you go for a walk, you are then calm. So proprioception is the body's ability to perceive where it is in space and perceive this perception of movement into the sensory system, into what's called the dorsal horn, and then the cerebellum. And then the cerebellum connects from, brains are built bottom up, back forward. The cerebellum is where all this movement comes through. And then the cerebellum is actually the air traffic control. We always think it's the middle of the brain. The cerebellum is more important. And then from there, it goes to the thalamus or the hippocampus or the amygdala, and then to the parietal and the prefrontal cortex. So the cerebellum needs proprioception. It needs sensory movement input to stay calm, regulated, and connected. So when your child is being overstimulated, they have to overcompensate and find other ways to create proprioception. Because what subluxation does is in the most sensory movement, proprioceptive rich area of the body, the brainstem, the neck, and the neurospinal system, that is where subluxation from birth trauma and just different chemical exposures. What happens when you get stressed to your neck and shoulders, right? Not just physical injury, but emotional injury and toxic injury, right? Where do you feel a hangover? In the base of your skull, in your neck. Sometimes your whole body's inflamed, right? I'm just using some parent speak to bring this to life, right? Toxic stress has a physical mechanism to it. Emotional stress has a physical mechanism to it. And of course, physical stress, like a forceps vacuum C-section birth, will lock in subluxation to the skull, to the neck, and to the neurospinal system. And when subluxation locks into those locations, it decreases proprioception, which therefore then increases what's called nociception. Nociception is the perception that the brain and sensory system has of noxious, annoying, stressful, harmful, potentially stimuli. So does it ever look like your child through stimming is worried they're going to be harmed? Does it ever look like they're in a full fight or flight, get me out of here, let me touch this, let me do this to be safe? Does it seem like they don't feel safe and they use stimming to find safety? If that's what it feels like emotionally, mom and dad, that's what's happening neurologically within the brain. And so the role of this proprioception versus nociception is called the gate theory, meaning that when proprioception goes down, so we're not moving, we're subluxated, we're stuck in this sympathetic storm, which is the whole essence of our work with this kind of chiropractic. We're the only ones who know about subluxation. We're the only ones that evaluate not just the big muscles, oh, your core is weak or you're on your toes too much, let's try and redirect that. OT, PT are great, but you got to get into the central conduit. The neck, the skull, the spine houses and protects the central autonomic and, most importantly, sensory motor system. Stemming in toes and jaw and hands is a compensatory mechanism for movement not happening in the spine and the nervous system in its central hub. And so this gate theory says that when proprioception goes down, it opens the gate for nociception. And when the sensory system has excessive nociception and decreased proprioception, you can think of it like a faulty neuromuscular coordination. So things are out of sync and out of balance. That's called dyskinesis. And dyskinesis is a term that then shifts the autonomic nervous system into sympathetic fight or flight overstimulation 24/7, and it alters the brain's sensory processing capacity. So subluxation, dyskinesis, too little proprioception, too much nociception, that's A. That's what causes the sensory issues, B. That's what causes autism and stimming and all these challenges, C and D and E and so forth. So what can be done? Rounding third base and getting into it, let's talk about where we need to then target our interventions and get the most help for kiddos struggling with stimming. One, it has to be a physically movement-based intervention to pack the most punch positively to help a child. Now, if we calm the outer environment, so let's go through the options that your family probably already has gone through or that other professionals will recommend. We're going to add them. These are on the list. These are important. So we're not dismissing them as non-effective. We're just saying, what if you tried everything and your child is stimming? And I'm going to address this. What if you had less stimming, started an intervention of some kind, maybe even chiropractic care, and some of the stimming returned? Some of you, that's happened. And before I'm done with this episode, I'm going to give you, it's kind of like an episode within an episode, okay? So let's talk about just stimming and how it's typically handled. One, if we have kind of this general medical acceptance of autism is genetic, there's nothing you can do about it, your child will have these struggles, here's how you can change your life and your environment to hopefully minimize the struggles. So outside in interventions would say, we'll calm. And actually, by the way, our practice is designed this way because we want to be the most sensory friendly place ever. So you choose certain paint colors, literally. You choose certain clothing that is less sensory offending, right? You get rid of the tags. You don't buy thick socks with stitches. You do haircuts differently. You do baths differently. You use essential oils. Like, I could go on and on. You can take the outside in environmental approach and you can try and build the most calm, easygoing sensory environment. And most families of children struggling with autism and stimming, they've definitely done that. And it's a wonderful and important thing, especially during certain stages of this storm. But what about Target? What about the restaurant? What about an airplane? What about an airport? What about vacation? What about all the parts of life that you and your family want to go experience and share those experiences with your beautiful, brilliant, incredible kiddo, whether they're diagnosis or not? All I ever see in kids is full life expression and experiences. This is called the Experience Miracles podcast because when I get to this part of every episode, as I'm a baseball guy, rounding third base and getting into the solutions, we're not just going to accept things like the conventional medical system would. We're not just going to alter things on the outside and ignore the things that are happening on the inside. Now, again, I love sensory calming environments, but the goal of our care when a child has autism and stimming, and it doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes it can honestly take years to get them all the way across this healing endeavor. But if I jump all the way cart to horse where I want to go with these solutions I'm giving you at the end, the goal of them from a provider like me, who's actually going to get to the deepest layer of root cause subluxation and this neurosensory motor dysfunction within the body that then ticks off the brain and then tells the brain to compensate by stimming. When you can actually get that rooted out of there all the way, it's not about getting rid of the overwhelm, the dysregulation, the stimming, and whatever other, kind of cohort of symptoms come with autism. Not in our work. Our work is designed to get your child into their fullest expression of life. You'll actually even see it with our practice if you're ever local to us. And a lot of PX docs design their practice using our model because we train, teach them kind of everything. It's the most sensory-friendly environment. And we could have a separate place over here. Okay, this office over here, this is where kiddos who are overwhelmed easily, they go. And we have some sensory sound deadened roomed and some other rooms and LED lights and everything else to help us in the process. But my biggest favorite goal and achievement that we celebrate more than anything else is when a kiddo can just come into who was stimming, didn't want to come in the office, was completely overstimulated even by our office, which is built for them. And a couple of weeks or a couple of months into care, they're just chilling. They're just walking in the office, in the toy room. The toy room is noisy. There's other kids. Another kid, let's just play it out to the worst of scenarios that eventually doesn't become bad at all. Another kiddo takes their toy, their favorite toy. Another kiddo bumps into them, sensory stimulation of the highest accord. And there's tons of noise and tons of people and there's stuff going on and they're moving around. And this kiddo that was previously overwhelmed by stimming and autism is just doing life, just playing, just hanging out. Because if they can do that in our office, then I know they can go to the water park. Then I know they can go on vacation. Then I know they can go to school. Then I know they can be in the classroom. So I got a couple of bullet points ahead on my outline here, right here. This is the goal of getting to the root cause. This is the goal of PX Talks. This is the goal of myself and this podcast and getting you into these directions. It's not to get rid of the bad stuff. That is a necessary step so often to get to the good stuff, which is the goal, which is experiencing life full out. So I definitely am 1 or 2 sections ahead because every time I teach this stuff, my least favorite part is the first part, talking about in the introduction, we got to go through the bad stuff. We got to describe this is what it is. The middle part is pretty close to my favorite because I'm a neuroscience guy. So I love to teach you all about, like on this episode, you guys, I love you. You are listening to me talk about proprioception, dyskinesis, the gate theory, nociception. I got to say cerebellum, amygdala, prefrontal cortex. I haven't yet said dysautonomia, disafferentation, developmental diaskesis, but they would all be in this. So you guys, you parents are so awesome, so courageous that you hang with the chief of the nerds here. And I hope I'm always making sense of it for you. And the whole reason that that's my second favorite section, the science section, is to get here. to my third favorite section, my most favorite section, the third section, the most favorite section, which is at the end of every podcast, which says, okay, I get the problem. I get what's causing it. What do I do about it? You got to have a physical intervention. This is where neurologically focused chiropractic care really shines. Now, every single time we have a child struggling with autism and stimming, we encourage, like you wouldn't believe, a multifaceted integrated approach. We work hand in hand with PTs and OTs and speech therapists. We're even fans of things like different sensory massage or kind of craniosacral. We can do most of that, fascial release. We do all that ourselves. So we don't really usually need to kind of refer to those sort of providers because chiropractically we are trained in a multitude of techniques. I've covered that on other episodes. You can dig in. But the truth is, you've got to address the issue at its location. And its location is in the neurospinal conduit. So I can really drive this home by explaining one more science thing that I forgot to kind of sneak in here. The most sensitive proprioception zones of the body. So it'd be called density of mechanoreceptors or proprioceptors in the land of the nerds here. The neck, the brainstem, by far, not even close. What's called the atlas vertebrae, the very top one, and the axis. So the occiput, base of the skull, the sphenoid, the eyes, and then those top couple of vertebrae in the brainstem area, not even close. The most sensitive area. It's why your child hates haircuts. It's why they hate to have their neck or their ears touched. It's why they hate to have their teeth brushed, because right next to the neck is the jaw. So the neck and the neurospinal system, you can call it the spine if you want. I always will tell you it's the neurospinal system because it's one living, we talk about it again, in anatomy textbooks, separate chapters. The way God designed it, it's all connected. And the spine houses, protects, coordinates, integrates, especially from a sensory motor function, neuromuscular, neurosensory. That is the most nutrient proprioceptive dense area. If you think about nutrient density, think of it in this landscape of proprioceptive density. What's most important to the brain? The neck and the spine. What's next? The jaw. What's third? Hands and feet. What's fourth? Genitals. So if your child overstimulates their jaw, overstimulates with their hand and their feet, hand flapping, touching everything, squeezing their fists, flapping their hands, walking on their toes, and then maybe touches, their genitals or other people too much, they are using those physical stimulations to compensate for what's not happening within their own spine, neck, and nervous system. So if you're putting this all together, and I pray that you are, anybody who listens to this, if you have more questions, go to our social media. If you don't already follow us, by the way, on Instagram and on Facebook, you can use either or both. You can always DM us there. We put out tons of content. We'd love for you to comment, engage with it, and share it. And then we'd love to have your DMs too if you have questions. My team gets those questions in. The second time, you probably listened to that already too. I do a second episode every single week called the Ask Dr. Tony Show. So if this one gets you lots of answers and there's something I didn't answer, go to our social media, go to Instagram, Facebook, and comment in there and have it with that. But that is why they're using those other parts of the body to compensate for the subluxation and the neurophysical challenges within the spine and the nervous system. So again, the interventions are absolutely calm the outside, but that won't be as effective long-term, big goals, change your life, as calming the inside. So what we do is we say, okay, we could alter their life. We could try and create this perfect routine and this perfect sensory thing. But then what part of life are they going to experience? Not all of it, because a lot of life is overstimulated. A lot of life is busy. A lot of life is noisy. A lot of life and a lot of the good stuff. You ever been to Six Flags on a roller coaster? It's crazy. You ever been to the Wisconsin Dells, us Midwesterners, and been up to the, we're a wilderness family, you Kalahari people, you're fancy, So you ever been there? And actually old school, I went to not those two fancy places first. So life has a lot to it. Sports game. You want to take your kid to a big NFL stadium and go through all that, right? You want to take them to concerts and have them experience that. The truth is, this needs to be addressed, cleared. Subluxation needs to be taken care of by a neurologically focused chiropractor so that over time, that nervous system can calm and regulate on its own, not need stemming for the compensation. That's how you get to the deepest layer root cause. And I said it there and I'll say it one more time. Couldn't be a bigger fan of also doing this in integration. So neurologically focused chiropractic care works wonderful on its own. It works really great in coordination with other interventions as well. The one thing in that, and this takes me to my kind of PS, my overtime thing I want to talk about, is what if you started another intervention, some sensory therapy, especially movement-based stuff, chiropractic, PT, Oh my goodness, if you have worked on your child's primitive reflexes and done some functional movement stuff, so often, about 80% of parents will tell me that when they start down those worlds, working on like primitive reflexes and what I call these secondary and tertiary elements to subluxation and the real root cause, it will actually increase their kids' sleep challenges, stemming, sensory overwhelm. And every now and again, even certain adjustments can do this too in our world. So let me address that here in overtime. What is happening if you're doing something that you know is good, that you know in your parent gut, my kid needs this care, they need this sort of intervention, and it creates a little bit of what we call a neurodetox or a retracing and reorganizational component of healing. Sometimes certain stems, especially these gross motor, because gross motor is foundational to development, sometimes certain stimulation stems will come back and kind of come out as a child is actually healing. So when it comes to, this is why we use the analogy all the time, it's like whack-a-mole. When you're really getting the brain, the body, the nervous system better, it's rarely a smooth path. It's rarely a linear, non-bumpy path. Often as, say, their gut and their immune system gets better as they start to get adjusted, sometimes the sensory motor system will go back through some of the developmental milestones that it missed, and it will go through them what looks like on the outside excessively, but it's actually innate intelligent compensation to get something back online that never did. So the reason that once you start some of the developmental focused, interventions, others are therapies, ours we call it care, sometimes you will have this reorganization or retracing, and sometimes you got to push through. Sometimes it's a neuro detox, and you can reach out to us if you want more videos, more articles, more episodes about that. Just, again, go to our socials and ask for information on the neuro detox. I've done a lot of content. I'll do a lot more content on this. I'm explaining it briefly here, but if you feel like your child has gone through this, reach out to us and we'll get that to you. So often these things come back up, and they're a necessary step to healing. And there's clinical data that a really advanced doctor can tell, is this needed? Is this actually just this neurological reorganization, retracing, or neurodetox? And if that's the case, it's important to push through. It's actually a sign of some of the nervous system components coming back online and trying to reintegrate and heal. So if your child has some stimming that returns as certain interventions like movement-based therapies or neurologically focused chiropractic care into their life, it's important, and I'm trying to do my best here in this very third-party way. It's important to talk to your chiropractor about this. It's important to talk to your doctor. It's important to talk to your therapist about this and say, how can you tell if this is needed and necessary or not? Because those that really know how to do this work will tell you and be able to explain to you, and parents, this needs to land with you. The thing I tap into forever is your parent gut instinct. Does this make sense for my child? My job is to talk about the neuroscience and everything across the board here. Each case is different. And so it's a little hard to explain this because it's such an individual clinical decision as to whether, and there's a whole lot of case components that are on an individual basis that says, is this kind of resetting of stimming that are maybe coming out for a short season through this detox, is it necessary and we must push through? Or is it a sign that we're doing these healing endeavors out of order? Because very often when I chat with you guys, and here's the makeup that would do this. And I'm just going to say it point blank to close this one. If your child is doing a ton of integrative functional therapies, so there's a lot of work on primitive reflexes, vestibular work, neurointegrative, you're doing a lot of the sensory stuff where like the flashing lights are on the computer or the wall and the wobble board, and there's visual stuff, and there's spinning stuff, and there's laser stuff, and there's biomedical stuff. And just take it for what I'm saying. If you're doing a ton in this biomedical, functional, really, I'm going to just, so you don't miss it, I'm going to call it fancy world, and your kid's getting worse, and their sleep, and their stimming, and their behavior, and their gross motor, and their fine motor, and some of these things are getting way worse, you're doing too much, okay? You're not, but you get what I'm saying. It is B and C and D being worked on and not A. So if you're doing a lot of that and your child is not getting neurologically focused adjustments, what we would call foundational interventions to address subluxation and neurological dysfunction at its core foundational level, or the third scenario, you are getting neurologically focused chiropractic care and adjustments, but you're also doing a ton of all of that other fancy stuff all at the same time, it's very likely that the increase in stims or the increase in challenges your kiddo is going through is a sign from their body saying too much all at once. What's happening with a subluxated, dysautonomic, dysphonetic kiddo is their neuromuscular brain-body connection is overwhelmed, dysregulated, and destabilized already. Even though all these things, these movement-based interventions, this functional neurology, this fancy cool laser stuff, it's good on paper, it has to do with sequencing. It has to do with what's called the batting order of getting kids better. And this is the hardest conversation, which is why I've done a whole episode on this, but I'm sneaking it into the end of this one because I know it's very, very, very much a stimming conversation. Hey, they were gone and now they're returning, even though we know this is good. It's just about, are the ducks lined up in the right order? And most providers never talk to this about parents. Most providers will sell you everything, tell you everything, do everything all at once. All of a sudden you're spending $20,000, $35,000, $50,000 on all this stuff all at once, and you're supposed to do it at home too. And at the same time, if that foundational nervous system isn't being adjusted, reset, and reorganized, it could throw things haywire, okay? And so most providers don't tell you this truth that I'm spending over time going through. And in the same breath, freaking hard as a parent. It's near impossible to hear my words here and apply them clinically into the game plan for your child. Because when your child struggles and they're stimming and they're nonverbal and there's seizures and there's a whole host of other not good things, what do you want? All of that gone yesterday. I would too. I'm right there with you. So the reason that I feel God has called me, compelled me, and given me experience, because guess what I used to do for my patients? Everything all at once. Guess what happened? They got worse, not better. You know what tended to get worse? Their stimming, their seizures, and their neuromotor system. It takes a significant period of time to do less to get more. And it may feel like, it probably will feel like, you're not doing enough. I should be adding the lasers. I should be doing primitive reflexes. I should be doing biomedical interventions. I should be doing homeopathic. I should get a sauna, and over time and in sequence to the totality of healing, those all might be needed. But what I want to leave you with is, what phase of healing is your child in right now? There's foundational phases and stages that must be gone through and addressed first to get the nervous system better stabilized, better regulated, so that it then can better handle and better respond to, with not only more benefit, but less side effect, other interventions like movement-based stuff, biomedical stuff, and so forth. So I need to write a book one day because I feel like I can get this all mapped out perhaps even a little better visually than I am just verbally here, or if you're watching this on video. But I know parents who live this life and have gone through this and maybe feel like I'm on second base, third base, fourth base, and I'm doing it all at once and it's not working and maybe the stims are getting worsening. You know what I just said. You understand it. You feel it because you've lived through it. So talk to your PX doctor about it. Talk to your other providers about it. One cheat code right now in my practice that is creating more results than anything else is not just adjusting kids and doing our job with excellence. It's calling time out and putting other stuff on the shelf until that nervous system has more slack and has more stability. It is one of the biggest breakthroughs that I see in healing that the world needs to know about right now, is how absolutely essential sequencing and batting order is. All right, everybody. This one was deep. Stimming is a very deep conversation to really explain what's going on. And I kind of slowed my cadence on this one a little bit more than usual. A little pro tip, because I also just interviewed Allie. I don't know if this one will be out before or after that one. I think it comes before. There'll be an interview coming up with Allie Miller, an incredible registered dietitian, speaking about being a biomedical boss. We talked about this, how important it is to get the nervous system just balanced and out of that storm first before gut healing and other interventions, deep breathing can come in. But you'll see Allie is a rock star who knows all sorts of neuroscience, but she was very calm and collected as she spoke through this. So you might have noticed that you didn't have to slow down. Anybody ever listen to the podcast with me? And normally I'm speaking at one, I'm sure sometimes during here, I was at 1.5 rate on my own, and you're like, usually you listen to other people and you have to speed them up. And then like Huberman, I got to speed him up when I listen to him, pretty much everybody. And then for me, have you ever had to slow me down? Wow, I'll try and be better. I'll try and take this pace and this cadence. Yeah, I'm still 50 some episodes into this. I'm still learning. But I love my job being there for your family in this digital connected capacity that God has given us to make the change that our kids and our families so deserve. And so if this served you well, will you please subscribe, download? If you haven't left a review yet, could you please do that? I would love that so much and be so appreciative if you could take the extra 2 minutes right now, go to Apple, go to Spotify and leave a review. And then, again, any questions you have, any other stuff you need us to cover, you send it out. Follow us on social if you're not already following at PX Docs on Instagram. And then you can find PX Docs, or you can search in Dr. Tony Ebel and the PX Docs Network on Facebook and the Book of Face, the Metaverse. We are there doing some incredible things to serve your family as well, with hope, answers, and help. And the more you share and subscribe and download and all the things, the more we reach more families across the world with this message that I know they so badly need. And the explanations they're so much looking forward to having and don't get from other doctors and practitioners. And then the drug-free foundational neurology solutions that get the job done. I love you all. Think the world of you. And I know this, God is moving mountains right now for our kids to be healthy again. There is a movement literally happening. I've been in it for 17 years, and I'll be honest, sometimes I was like, we're going to get this job done. Can we really get this message to these kids so we can get the help they need to their message to their parents so we can get the help these kids need? And there's some big stuff happening right now in this world that's going to make our families and future generations healthy again. And I'm here for it, and I hope you are too. God bless. Be well. See you on the next one.